Good evening, everybody. On behalf of Ladies Study Group Kolkata, I welcome you all to a very special session on smart power. I invite our esteemed speaker, Mr. Sanjoy Roy, onto the screen. Welcome to Ladies Study Group Kolkata, and thank you for giving your time. Sanjoy Roy is the producer of the world's largest free literary gathering, the annual Jaipur Literature Festival. An entrepreneur of the arts, he is the managing director of Teamwork Arts, which produces over 33 highly acclaimed performing arts, visual arts, literary festivals across 40 cities around the world. He is also founder trustee of Salaam Baalak Trust, working to provide support services for street and working children in the inner city of Delhi. Sanjoy will be discussing India's cultural diversity as the way to people's hearts across the world. I invite Nandita Palchoudhuri onto the screen. Welcome to Ladies Study Group Kolkata. Hello. Nandita is a social entrepreneur, curating and consulting internationally on Indian folk art, craft, and performance practices. Thank you so much for taking your time to moderate today's session. You have been a dear friend of our organization for a very long time. Over to you, Nandita.
Good evening, all. After this kind of introduction to Sanjoy Roy and Team Arts, I'm not going to have much to say other than beginning from when I first probably met him. I think it was in the early 2000s. It was on the tarmac of the Udaipur airport. I saw this man get off a flight. We were all going into a very important conference that the British Council was putting together for art managers. And I saw this man with a smile kind of spilling out of his face. Everybody seemed to know him. And I was wondering, here comes a serious contender for the best hair prize. And then, as he came closer, I got to know that, yes, this is Sanjoy Roy, and he's from Delhi, and he does films and some other kind of, artistic activities. And from then to 20 years now, this man has produced this flagship company, Teamwork Arts, that India flaunts absolutely proudly all over the world. So today, I'm hoping that by the end of this conversation, we not only know, the size of the things that he does and the value it brings and so on, but we have a deeper and better understanding of how he does it and why he does it. So before we begin, can I please ask Dibyendu to just show us a short presentation on what Teamwork does? Dibyendu?
Teamwork Arts takes India's artistic diversity to the world across continents, traversing from Australia, Canada, China, Egypt, Germany, Hong Kong, Singapore, South Africa, Russia, South Korea, Sweden, UK, and the USA in its stunning array of 16 international festivals in over 40 cities. A feast for the senses, these are spectacles of dance, music, cinema, theatre, literature, and so much more.
Okay, so you name it and they do it. And if you're more interested in, the names and the variety of things that Teamwork Art does, please go into their website let us not spend our precious time with Sanjoy before us discussing those. So, Sanjoy, let's begin right at the beginning. I mean, with two O's in your name, it seems quite, obvious that you have some sort of a Bengali connection. But as far as I know, you didn't grow up Calcutta centric. So why don't you begin with telling us what the early years were like, and if you can unearth some of those influences that were steering you towards the arts in those years.
Thank you, Nandita, and thank you, Shumita Di and the ladies study group. It's actually an honor to be here. This is one has known about the ladies study group for many, many years. Many of my mashis and pishis and all have been part of this. So it's really an honor for me to be here. And the minute Shumita Di invited me, I was like, absolutely, there's no way I can say no. And who better than to have this conversation with Nandita, who actually I've known longer than the 20 years that she's talked about. But as I'm 32 years only, we won't go back into the previous lot. But absolutely, Nandita, I mean, my growing up memories, yes, I've never lived in Kolkata, but both my Mamar Bari and my father's homes were both in Kolkata. My mother is a Guptu from 7 Guptu Lane in Jorashaku. My father's house or our house now is at the corner of Lansdowne Road and Lake Road. And both my grandmother and my grandfather were writers. My grandmother wrote children's stories. This is also Parvati's grandmother. And my grandfather he ran away from what is now Bangladesh. He was in Borishal, and he ran away and stowed away on a ship, goes off to Japan. From Japan, he goes off to Canada, and from Canada goes off to America to set up the Gadar Party there. He then studies in America for a while, tours America, giving lectures on the teachings of Ramakrishna. And we found a clipping the other day where it says in 1904, he went off on a expedition to the Amazon. So, a charmed life is what I think they lived. He then goes on to the UK. He studies in Oxford and comes back to India as the conservator of forests to the then Madras presidency. Both my parents, my mother and my father, also always loved the arts. My father loved dance. My mother loved literature and music. So in many ways, we've grown up like that. In Jorashakur, in Guptubadi, we have the Durga Puja. So much of my life, or at least my youth, was spent. I used to love doing pujo. So I used to have a special pujo almari where I used to do arati, and they used to make these little small kasha thalis, which I used to present to the gods and goddesses. So in many ways, I've always been steeped in tradition and culture. The arts has been part of my life. In school, I was always interested in theater and spent more time rehearsing than I did in class. And that's what followed me into university. I came to St. Stephen's College in Delhi. And yeah, as they say, the rest is history. So I've had the privilege of making my passion my work, which I think is very rare for most people. Both you and I, while we understand that it is a passion, we've turned it into our profession. And I think both of us have always tried to be mentors to legions of young people who start something with passion, but we've always guided them in terms of passion is great, but this is a profession. This contributes to society. This contributes to local GDP. And I think that's the lesson that you and I have sort of taken over the many years that we've known each other.
Well, I'm honored to be spoken of in the same breath as you and by you. But let me ask you this. This is a documentary I hugely enjoyed myself, Shahajahanabad, and you got a lot of acclaim for it, awards and so on. Why didn't you remain with films?
So again, much of what we've done, Nandita, has been accidental, as you know. So Harvard Business School teaches how I had a plan and a vision and a 5-year and 10-year and 15-year thing to take over the world. None of it is true. Everything has been accidental. Television. So in the early 80s, when I used to look after, was the executive director of Theatre Action Group, which was Barry John was our artistic director. Even at that point of time, every time I had to do something, one would always think about how could one find work for our other colleagues in theatre. It's also a place that I met my wife, Punita, who, as you know, is also into theatre or was into theatre then. And when I met my to-be father-in-law, he asked me, he said, "So young man, what do you do?" So I said, "I do theater." So he said, no, I mean, what's your day job? So I said, no, I do theater. I pay myself 1,000 rupees and I look after the theater company. So he wasn't impressed. And
At
those
all.
days, remember, Nandita, that, television had just started opening up. So, and Bobby Beatty, who went on to make The Bandit Queen and produced The Rising and so on and so forth, he had come to me a number of times and said, "Sanjoy, will you direct or produce this new television series that I've had?" And I used to say, "No way, I'm a theater person, I will not go to television." But as the wedding date drew closer, I decided to take on his offer, directed a couple of series. And then after 2 years, Mohit and I set up Teamwork, primarily as a place to hire all our colleagues in theater. And by which time television had been privatized. So you had Z and LTV and all of the other channels that had opened up. And
Right.
we were making about 14 or 15 daily or weekly shows, soap operas and game shows like Tolmol Ke Bol and soap operas, etc. And every Saturday afternoon, I used to do a meeting with all our producer and director colleagues in terms of next week, who should we shoot or write out of the script? What's the theme of the next a news program? What's the theme of the next food program? And in one of those Saturday meetings, two of my colleagues, and you know them, Sharupa Datta and Manika Berry, came into my room and they said, "Listen, we are brain dead. We can't do this anymore." Those days, if you remember, there was no concept of a season. If you had a program which was successful, it ran every day,
On
every
and
week,
on.
week after week, month after month, year after year. And many of our programs had been running for 6 or 7 years. And they said, "We can't do this. We don't have any life." So, in a moment of foolishness or weakness, I sort of said, "Okay, let's stop. If we don't want to do this, let's stop. And let's move back to the arts." So, in 1995, we stopped all our television programming. It took some time, it took a year or so. The television channels were very upset. We nearly went bankrupt. We were a very large television company. We nearly went bankrupt because we didn't have this money coming in every hour on the hour. And that's when we started looking at documentaries, and Shahajahanabad was, in that sense, the first documentary. And I remember saying to my colleagues, I said, television, we churn around like an episode a day or 2 episodes a day. A documentary like Shahajahanabad, which was a full-length, feature-length documentary, 210 minutes, took us 3 months or 4 months to produce. So it was a completely different world.
But it
it's
was a
not that
wonderful labor of love.
it was, and even today it sort of finds a lot of
Yes.
a lot of
Lot of
space all over the
traction.
place. And in many ways, it also set the stage of what we wanted to do. We wanted to be in
Afterwards.
the knowledge space in the arts, and that really was, in many ways, the beginning. We continue to be in television today, Nandita. We produce thousands of hours of programming, not in the sense of television as we know it, but certainly digital content, which is what we've
So my
been
next
doing.
question, Sanjoy, leads from here in the sense that I know that you have this, kind of abiding love for theater, and it was really your core when you began your foray into the arts. And I feel really proud to share that people like Nandita Das, Manoj Vajpayee, and believe it or not, even Shah Rukh Khan had their first kind of launch with Teamwork. So these meta awards that you give, the excellence in theater that's sponsored by the Mahindras, is that kind of your umbilical cord to theater? And it's the way that you keep in touch with theater. what does Meta do for the theatres? So before you can answer me, may I ask Dibendu to just show a short reel of, what you do at the Meta while you're giving the awards. Dibendu, can you please share with us the short reel?
Theatre is saying the really important things that need to be said in our society today. So please open your eyes and get engaged with theatre and see what wonderful work is happening. It'll make you think, it'll change your outlook on various aspects of society today.
I think Meta this year is fantastic, it's brilliant, it's off to a great start.
ये पूरे भारतवर्ष में अपने ढंग का बिल्कुल अकेला आयोजन है।
Without any consideration for commercial reasons, you just pick the best theatre. It is guided by only one principle, and that is excellence.
Even those who sort of don't qualify for awards do tend to feel recognized, and that's very important for an initiative of this kind.
Mahindra Excellence Theatre Award brings excellent theatre.
It was fresh, it was original and inspiring.
This is the first time I've been to Meta and I'm having a fantastic time. Guys, you rock.
Meta is absolutely the most glorious platform for theatre.
महिंद्रा वालों का सबको शुक्रगुजार करना चाहिए, खासकर थिएटर वालों को, कि एक इस तरह का फेस्टिवल उन्होंने शुरू किया और एक्सीलेंट प्लेस.
Actually, I hadn't expected anything as experimental as this, I have to say, and I was really deeply impressed.
It's all a flow between sound and word and movement, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself.
So friends, for the 14th year of the Mahindra Excellence in Theatre Awards, let's perform, let's applaud, let's rise.
हर भाषा का हर रंगकर्मी चाहता है कि एक बार उसे मेटा में अपना नाटक प्रदर्शित करने का मौका मिल जाए तो उसका रंगकर्म सार्थक हो जाएगा.
No, you're absolutely right, Nandita. I mean, there is a umbilical cord between me and theatre. Meta is only an expression. As you know, in the metros, we tend to think that theatre only belongs to the metros, which is not true. Through Meta, we have realized that much of the more interesting theatre that's coming out today is coming out from the Jabalpurs and the Cuttaks and the smaller cities across the length and breadth of the country. If it wasn't for Meta, we wouldn't have discovered this. The majority of work that comes to us that gets selected today is from the hinterland across Kerala and across the Northeast. Some incredibly powerful stories. Earlier, whereas it used to be, say, Bombay and Pune, Kolkata and Delhi, today it's not. Today it's Bhagalpur, it's Kanpur, it's so many different places. And more what Meta has done, and not what we have done, is that it's encouraged young people, it's encouraged new writing, it's encouraged the discovery of a new language of theatre, and it's been very, very exciting. So today we do Meta across different languages. In the early years, if it was in Tamil or Telugu or Bengali, we used to struggle to get audiences. Today, the minute Meta is announced, irrespective of the language, and of course, we have subtitles like you do in opera because we want it accessible. We have sold out shows. What happened with the lockdown is even more interesting. So when last year we weren't able to do Meta Live in 2020, and of course this year we took it digital. In 2019, our last Meta, what you saw, the 14th Meta, we have a capacity of say 1,200 people a day watching plays between LTG and Kamani and Sri Ram Center. In 2021, when we did Meta online, we did 10 plays, roughly what we do on the on-ground thing. We had 1.2 million people who watched the shows from across the world. So it's completely turned for us how theater can be made accessible. And this is not just to audiences in India, but of course it is India, but it's really audiences across the world who have discovered theater from India. It's quite incredible.
Okay, so from here, let's move on to your hat where you head industry bodies. So you're the chair of the FICCI Creative Industries Committee. You are the president of IMA. And here, instead of being the presenter of the arts, you're the enabler or the person who's kind of, aggregating it. So you have the other view of this, artistic kind of trajectory. Now, as we all know, India is perhaps the most densely populated in terms of culture. And this is, like you said, very, very visible on especially these reality shows and every little opportunity that the whole of India gets to come and see, show you how they sing, how they dance, how they do anything. But when it comes to organization and interest, somehow we just lose the plot. So in spite of having all the software, all the material that one needs, one is unable to put it out there. So my question to you is, if the Durga Puja was handed over to teamwork, I mean, could you turn it into a world-class, has to be seen carnival? I mean, how would you go about it?
So let me answer the question a little differently. I think Durga Puja in Kolkata is really the breakout moment for design in India. It has the most incredible, breathtaking design, where I think it needs a little different management. And of course, as you know, Nandita, from the big survey that's happened, which hasn't been released yet, but we're hoping that it's released sooner or later. It is the single largest economic activity in the state of West Bengal. And if you look at its contribution to India's GDP, just that month in October, it is a substantial figure not to be messed with. Now, unfortunately, what happens in celebrations like the Durga Puja, in Edinburgh, as you know, Nandita, which is, the mecca of the arts in the world, where everybody goes to, what is it that they do? Yes, they have 7 or 8 different festivals that happen in Edinburgh at the same time, but it's all marketed as one, as the Edinburgh Festival. And there's a huge amount of money and resources and marketing to be able to create a comprehensive brand Edinburgh Festival, which, for example, if one was able to do in Chennai for the season, in December and January, whether it's the music sabhas or the dance sabhas, you would then have even a larger festival than what you see in Edinburgh. Similarly, in Kolkata or in West Bengal or most parts of India, during Durga Puja, you have an outpouring of talent, design, retail, food, so everything that brings tourism and people together. Bringing people together, as we know, is an enormous task. And when you bring them together in these millions, and you literally ensure that the city, every street corner comes alive What you do need is perhaps a coordinating overbody that just pulls some of these things together, creates a identifiable map, highlights like you all do, the 26 or the 100 important whatever, the 30 places where you get the best food, the 40 places where you can buy the best things, and make sure that it is marketed in a way that's accessible. Today, because your market is so intense in Kolkata, and you don't need to look outside because everybody is coming in, everybody is looking inwards rather than outwards. I would recommend to you all, and I've said this a number of times to the government of West Bengal as well, look at the possibility of using Durga Puja as the prime example of Bengal's design industry. Design is where money sits. Architecture, design, concept, lighting, the way you do your flowers, all of this is enormous amounts of money and contribution to GDP and the economy. Look at that. That is Bengal's give back to the world. And if you look at this then as a service provider, as a service industry, and put in some resources there to make it far more organized, you can stop looking at, oh, let's get Tatas to come back and invest in a factory. Please remember, Nandita, as you and I know, for every $1 million that's invested in built industry, you typically create 9 to 11 jobs. For every $1 million that's invested into the service industry, the creative industry, you create 99 to 133 jobs. How can you argue against this, especially in a place like Bengal? So why can't Mr. Amit Mitra, your finance minister, and Didi look at the creative industries more focused? And why can't the ladies study group, which has got a lot of influence in business, seriously look at this as a way forward? So go beyond built industry. I mean, manufacturing today is dead and gone in India. Whatever you do, it'll always be beaten by Vietnam or China or Timbuktu. But in the creative sector, we are numero uno. We are number one. Use your strength. It's not just ki kore dao. Kore dao apni kore din na. Eta to, this is the arts. You don't need to get money. You don't need to be paid. Why? It's not just that.
Yeah, I do hope Didi and other powers that be are listening to you. And there seems to be a consciousness and sensitivity to the possibilities that Durga Puja holds. And I'm sure something's going to happen soon. Now, next up, Sanjoy, I want to read to you one of your, kind of quotations from a interview that I really liked. I love the way you put it all together. So maybe you've forgotten, but let's remind you. You said, we have to nurture the young, celebrate genius, bring in a sharp sense of design and throw out tacky, outdated acts. And above all, we should be driven by a hunger to be original and thereby create that one occasion which will live on in people's memories. So my question to you is that in which of your productions do you think you've come closest to this?
Each production that, so let me qualify for a second. I actually now do very little in terms of actual productions because, that's unfortunately not my role. But the times that I do, and, just last week, I put together a show for ambassadors and high commissioners who were in India. It was a show that was then beamed by the government as part of Amrit Mahotsav. So each time a show, or I'm requested by my colleagues, or I'm involved in a show, what I try and do is discover what is it that people hasn't seen? What is the aspect of that art form that we haven't seen or understood? Keeping intact the purity and the form. So for me, it's not about oh, let's modernize Bharatnatyam, or let's modernize Kuchipudi, or let's modernize Carnatic violin. For me, it's, can we present it in its purest form? Because the Indian form of arts is always evolving. Young people, when they learn their Kathak or their Carnatic violin or their North Indian classical or their Robindra Sangeet, also have influences of the OTT platforms and Netflix and so on and so forth. So they come from a very contemporary thought process. So distilling that thought process and getting them to discover something more. So I'll give you an example. So Rama Vaidyanathan, who, as you all know,
Yes, I know.
is a very celebrated Bharatnatyam dancer. So on the 13th, when I was rehearsing with Rama, I said, Rama, you know, this is what I've thought. I wanted the Naga choir to set the stage of a morning, because this was a morning act that we were opening with. The show was going to open with Rama Vaidyanathan. I said, can the Naga choir give us bird sounds and give us the morning, a sound of the morning? And to that, for example, I asked Dadi, he has these two big hand puppets, the Namaste, which of course, you know, we needed to bring to. I said, can Rama appear from behind the hand puppets, which had alta in the inside, so that again, tradition. And then we had Rais Khan, a saxophone player from Rajasthan.
Oh.
Rais Khan is part of a brass band. And Harpreet, who sings Sufi and Kabir. I said, could we create a piece of work? And Rama took to it. She said, I could never conceive of something, of doing something like this without in any way moving out of the Bharat idiom.
Her genre.
Her genre. Similarly with Jaya Prabha and the Mohiniyattam style. And this wasn't necessarily my idea. I had seen Bharati Shivaji and do Mohiniyattam in Swan Lake, which we have presented across the world in a number of places. Again, showing how the form is pure, but you look at the collaboration as how well it blends. So we had Vijayji create a piece. I'd got Sharat Chandra Srivastav, who's Joga Kelkar's grandson, and again a disciple of his, in the North Indian violin form, to create a piece of orchestrated music using strings. So 24 string instruments.
Wow.
And using the percussion to create the music for this Mohiniyattam piece.
Fantastic.
And again, both forms remained pure. Yet the collaboration between the forms was created an energy which was, as MasterCard would say it, priceless. But in this show, what really was amazing, Nandita, which is the reason I'm giving you this as an example, is that this is a show that happened, remember, 13th of August, 16 or 17 months after the March 23rd lockdown. First time that artists came together to perform, 250 artists on one stage. And for the first time, they were earning. As you know, it's been rare for people to earn in this period, which is the reason I agreed to do the show, even though we'd been given three days time to do it. The atmosphere was absolutely, something else. And I'll give you another corollary to that. So in Sydney Opera House, some years ago, when I was designing a show for the Sydney Opera House for the opening gala, I had Aboriginal dancers do their Aboriginal work, but immediately it came with Sanskrit shlokas and, jazz musicians and Sonam Kalra and the Nrityagram dancers, so on and so forth. And yes, it was a beautiful show, and I had enough time to design it. And I was sitting in the audience, and every minister was there, and blah blah blah. And I saw the director of the Sydney Opera House, who's obviously no chicken, weeping, and I'm like, okay, maybe I've done something wrong. Maybe he hates it, so weeping. And then later in the interval, he sort of came and hugged me, and he said, "I can't speak." And I said, So at the end of the show, when we had a chance, I said, "What happened?" He said, "We've never been able to present an Aboriginal group in a mainstream show in the way that you've done. Now, as an outsider, one doesn't, I don't look at it
Look
like
at the
that.
hierarchy. Yeah, the hierarchy is
Perhaps
not.
if you came with that baggage, you would then say, oh, Aboriginal, so I must do, I'll give you an example in Canada when they asked me to do this prayer to country. I was said, listen, I'm not a hypocrite. I refuse to do this. If you really believe that you are paying obeisance to the ancestors and the inheritors of this land, why don't you instead either give their land back or pay them the rent for the land? But don't do this lip service of doing this, oh, this prayer to the country and, our ambassadors bullshit that you tend to hear in occasions like this. So in each of these shows, of course, one always tries to strive to excellence, answering your specific question. But what is excellence and in whose mind is it? My need for excellence drives my colleagues up the wall. And I know your need for excellence, Nandita, and all your design drives craft people up the wall. So I think excellence too is a very, subjective thing. But if we are able to create a coming together, if we're able to create an atmosphere that transports you, like one of these ambassadors who came to see me for lunch at office said, I was transported. That's what you want, right? Then it doesn't matter whether...
So right here, Sanjoy, I'm going to interrupt you with the next question because it's kind of linked in the sense that, see, you've done such huge numbers of programs, works, festivals. I mean, it's just uncountable, the kind of stuff I'm sure you've forgotten. So is it very profitable? Does money really motivate you? Or what is it? Why do you do this? What keeps you going to do the next thing?
So I always blame my parents for this, Nandita, and I'm sure you
Bengali.
Bengali, Bhadro log, money doesn't form a part and parcel of our being.
It's a bad word.
Having said that, teamwork is a company. And when I first set it up as a company as opposed to a not-for-profit, my aim was one, to show that the arts can and does create wealth in the same way that, say, banking does or finance does or retail does or whatever. And our effort is that if we can show in the pure arts that we are profitable, many more companies across the world will create platforms for artists. That's always been our intent. When we were invested into, 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, again, when the investors came knocking at my door, my colleagues and my first reaction when they presented their plan to us was, I laughed and I said, I don't think you guys know what you're talking about. Go back to your homework. Go meet, Disney and blah, 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 and then come back because you're investing in the arts. And they were like, no, you don't know what your value is. We understand the value. So I think it's only when we they exit will we really understand the success of this, whether it does make money or doesn't make money in this way that we are understanding. Well, what I do know, Nandita, and what you also know as well, is that every aspect of the arts creates a fairly substantial contribution to the economy. I'll give you the Jaipur Literature Festival as an example. Jaipur contributed in 2020, which was the last formal live part of it. It contributed 113 crores of additional spend into Jaipur's economy. Not necessarily
that's
coming
money.
to us, but that's money into Jaipur, and this is cracked information. Similarly, I'll give you another example. NCPA did a survey where they realized that to put any one artist onto stage, so say a solo musician or a theater person or a dancer or whatever, you need 33 people. So which is your front of house, your
all the backup,
your lighting person, your design person, your backstage, your janitor, your cleaner, your parking people, your mumfali wala. So we forget that the ecosystem that we support, that the arts support, is ginormous. And this lockdown in many ways has really just completely killed that ecosystem, sadly so.
Yes, absolutely. And, I'm going to now quickly jump to the next few questions because there's no end to what one can ask you, but the Ladies Study Group has a very finite slot for us. So let's move to cultural diplomacy. Say, the Goethe Institute, the American Center, the Alliance Française, the British Council, all of them are arms of cultural diplomacy that maps onto the politics of their country and its interaction with another. And similarly, say in the 80s and 90s, the festivals of India that we used to host were huge successes also in the same genre. So you, as the single largest visible kind of organization that presents work internationally, do you think you're also you're co-opted into the political kind of conversation, the diplomacy, the soft power that India peddles in all these countries in which you operate? Are you a means through which?
Totally, Nandita, and we're very conscious of that. I'll give you an example. In South Africa, when we first started our festival in whatever 2003 or 4, or whichever year it was. Now, one of the things is the South Africa government had reached out to our consul general or ambassador then, Ambassador Navdeep Suri, and said, all of the wealth in South Africa, in Newtown, in Johannesburg, had disappeared in the central business district because of crime. When apartheid was lifted, they won independence. It was the most fancy economic country that they had. So all of Africa came here. As a result of which crime, the amount of weapons that were still available with everybody who were fighting against the apartheid. So one of the things that, when Navdeep first called me and said, I need you to come to South Africa, I was like, no way, I don't know where it is. There's no direct flight. There was no flatbed in those days. I said, I'm not coming. And you know what we're like, how racist we are. So I'm like, Kalo lo, forget it. I'm not coming.
Don't tell me that.
So I arrived there for one day, and they set up this, series of meetings with the city and everybody. And I said to them 3 things. I said, they said, what can we do? Because the 2 banks, Standard Bank and First National, had given the city this job that either bring back investment into the city center or we are going to move out. And that would have spelled complete ruin, rack and ruin for the city. So once they'd given me the problem, I said, why don't you delineate a cultural district in Newtown? And I said, ensure that there's great lighting and great policing. And I said, in 3 years' time, I will walk across Mary Fitzgerald Square with my mobile phone in my hand, and I won't get mugged, which is what came to happen. When they delineated it, galleries came in, museums were set up. We converted the old powerhouse into a conference center, blah, blah, blah. Coming to India, the very fact that one of the first things that we did in as part of this initiative was a festival called Shared History, which we then took to Cape Town and to Durban. And in Durban and in Johannesburg and in Cape Town, people of Indian origin who had lost track of their roots, be it in Andhra or Tamil Nadu or Bihar or wherever they had come from, they had disowned it because they saw themselves as people of color and they wanted to align themselves with their white masters as opposed to the black population who had it even worse. When they saw in a concert with Dr. L. Subramaniam and the KZN, the KwaZulu-Natal Philharmonic Orchestra, the city mayor, the president, the vice president, every white, arts aficionado there, for them it became, in many ways, a sense of pride to belong. And many of them, because of that, then started wanting to understand their roots. And then we had to create a whole program with which they could connect back to Andhra or Tamil Nadu or Bihar and come and find what those roots were. So it gave people a sense of pride, a sense of belonging, and most importantly, brought home to them their rich cultural traditions which in many ways they had become so insular of. Like if you went to Johannesburg, if you went to Lansdowne, for example, Lenasia, the Gujarati ladies there were like the Gujarati ladies in Porbandar in 1890. They wore the same kind of clothes, they had the same kind of customs and traditions, and served you the same kind of food. Now, fast forward to Glasgow, Nandita. Glasgow, we did a very big project, if you remember, one of those years with Tramway Theatre when we were doing our Festival of India in Edinburgh. And there again, there was this disconnect between the Punjabi grandparents and the Punjabi grandkids. There was an enormous disconnect between the grandparents and the grandkids, because the grandparents from Punjab and Haryana were like what was their mulk in 1960. So that's what they
Yeah.
come. Whereas their grandkids came back to the Punjab, went to their villages, saw their cousins doing, smoking pot, doing worse things, going to the disco, and there was a huge disconnect. So again, our festival, what it was able to do is find that connect for them between a lost generation and this new generation. So totally,
Yes, Sanjoy,
every
I
time
can
we do something, we create this.
I totally agree with you, because I was a part of the Durban kind of event that you had done, and Harsh Sringla was the consul, and I'm still proudly telling everyone.
I think we've lost Nandita.
I think no, it's just coming and going. There seems to
You're
be some
back. You're
sort
back.
of a...
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, but I can't see you. Anyhow, my question to you next was that, in most of these organizations, the charisma and ability of an individual often lies behind the success story. And say with Teamwork Arts, it's probably you. Sadly, the same success story comes, crashing down in the absence of that person. So do you have a success? Hello? Seems to
I can
have
hear you.
crashed
Go
out.
ahead. I can hear you.
Yeah. So do you have a succession plan in place, Sanjoy, for Teamwork Arts? Do you have a way, have you thought of a strategy for the Jaipur Lit Fest to be institutionalized so that it's not so persona driven and dependent?
So Nandita, I think you know me more than most people, and you know that I actually do very little. I can be the face, but much of the work, the programming, and the work across festivals are done by the heads of our different festivals, and I'm only the sort of the face. So in any organization, and that's again one of the reasons that we are a company as opposed to a not-for-profit, is that we have a hit by bus plan. Many of our colleagues run independently their own festivals. Many of the festivals I don't even go to anymore. I mean, physically, it's impossible to do to be at every place at every given point of
there are
time.
too
So
many.
totally, and you're absolutely right. This is one of the biggest issues. For us, the success of anything that we start, Nandita, is also how many people have copied it. So with the Jaipur Literature Festival, our success is that there's about 330 odd festivals across the world, from the Bay Area Book Festival in Berkeley to Sri Lanka to Ubud to Australia, that have taken inspiration from the Jaipur Literature Festival. So even if the Jaipur Literature Festival dies, and like most things, this too will have a time or shelf life, other festivals will continue. We've shown that literature is sexy. Literature can be and will be one of the platforms for ideation, new ideas, and new thoughts, not just in Jaipur, not just in cities in India, but across the world. In your own city in Kolkata, you have 3, if not 4, literature festivals now,
Yes.
which is, I think, very symbolic of the success of something that happens like this.
fantastic to know that you're really thinking about it, because we don't want to let go of these wonderful things that you've created. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Now, after all your staggering achievement, as if it were not enough, you now also are totally invested in the Salaam Baalak Trust. This is something you started way back, and I want to know what it is that made you start it and what do you do with it now. But before we can launch into your answer, I'd like to show you slides that Preeti Kapoor, a past president of LSG, has unearthed from your visit in '89, I think. So maybe have those 2 slides, please. Divendu?
Totally. I mean, that's amazing. Please
So
send me
Sanjoy,
the
tell us,
photographs.
what were you up to?
So this was so 32 years ago. It's exactly the same time that we set up Teamwork. We set up Salaam Baalak Trust. Salaam Baalak Trust was born out of 2 programs. In the mid 80s, we, as part of Theatre Action Group, we started a project called Nukkad, which was to an arts project with street and working children in the New Delhi railway station, which started with us giving the kids an egg and a glass of milk in the morning, reading the newspaper to them. Cecil Kadir, our colleague, used to do that, followed by a theatre workshop, which then graduated into a wonderful play called Jeevan Ki Gaadi, which Barry John created. When Meera got inspired, Meera was also part of TAG. When Meera Nair got inspired to do Salaam Bombay, he asked Barry to come out and do a whole host of workshops with street kids. And Salaam Bombay, the movie, was created. And it was the movie then that gave rise to Salaam Baalak Trust, which Meera's mother, Mrs. Nair, and I set up 33 years ago. And the photograph that you see was on a fundraising tour that we did with Dr. L. Subramaniam, who had composed the music for Salaam Bombay, the movie. And we went to Calcutta, to Bombay, to Bangalore, and of course Delhi. And you saw the actor there, you saw Meera there, and it was wonderful. And to answer your question, Salaam Baalak Trust today we started with 25 kids and 3 staff at the New Delhi railway station. Today, Salaam Baalak Trust looks after 9,500 children every year in our 17 centers in Delhi. We have about 300 staff. Much of our program is how can we look after these kids in a holistic way? How can we provide every other facility to them that our kids get, for example? Many of our kids have gone on to becoming very successful. Vicky Roy is a hugely successful photographer whose work is in every major museum across the world. Bablu, Shadat, most of our kids have traveled across the world in shows done, whether it's Asta Debu or Dadi Padamji or ourselves. One of our kids many years ago came to me and said, Bhaiya, I want to be an aeronautical engineer. And I was like, oh my God, that's a lot of money. How are we going to do this? But we did put him through his aeronautical engineering program in Chennai. He went on to get a 6-figure salary. He left that. He's now part of a unicorn, a big startup. We get 2 scholarships from the United States every year to community college. We get 16 scholarships from Australia each year for our kids. And I keep saying, these are kids who are unlettered. They come to us from the Bihars and the West Bengals and the Andhras and the UPs of the world. These are kids who choose to run away from home because they don't want to face the kind of abject poverty and leading from abject poverty, the extreme physical and mental abuse that follows, especially in cases where it's either a minority community or a minority religion. And I'm going to give you one example just so that you understand the milieu from which these kids come from. Anju, this kid from a village in Uttar Pradesh, in a Sunday market, her brother, who was 7 years old, she was 11, her brother catches the eye of another girl from across the market square. The girl is the Thakur's daughter. So the next Sunday, the Thakur's sons and nephews and cousins or whatever waylay this girl and the boy on the way to the Sunday market in their village, drag her into the sugarcane field to try and rape her as revenge for the brother looking at their sisters into their sister's eyes. She fights them off, and they instead hack off her right arm, and they take it into the village as proof that they have, avenged
Punished
their
her.
sister's honor. They leave this
Well,
girl to
Sanjoy,
die. They leave this girl to die. Luckily, there's a passerby who comes by, picks her up, takes her to the primary healthcare center. The Thakur is sent word she's not treated, takes her to the next village, not treated, takes her to the next town, not treated. Finally, she lands up in Lucknow 36 hours later without any painkiller, medication, whatever, apart from what's been tied. Fast forward, she's now looked after, treated. Fast forward to March. March, they tell the girl and the parents, because the girl is signed, has filed the FIR, and they say they're going to kidnap you because they want you to rescind your FIR. Please leave because we can't protect you in the hospital in Lucknow. They leave, but they kidnap the brother, and she then has to say that it was an accident. She comes to us. This girl now today heads a Fortis housekeeping department in the Fortis.
Wow. Hats off.
So
amazing.
And this story that I've given you, Nandita, is one of the lesser stories of abuse. It was only one arm that was hacked, and it was a happy story, a happy ending.
Happy
So I keep saying, if you give these children who you see at every street corner an opportunity, use the arts and use mental health facilities to be able to provide them what every child has a right to be given, which is a right to food, a right to education, and a right to a safe place to sleep and to enjoy his or her childhood, and most importantly, the right to dream. And if you give them the right to dream, they can achieve just about anything, including what you and me or any of our members of this conversation can achieve.
Well, very sadly, it seems to be that we've come to the end of the hour, and though I have quite a few very pressing questions to ask Sanjoy, I'll have to sign off here. And you will never know that Sanjoy is the most brilliant cook. And if you want to get on to the list of his guests for his famous legendary parties, what you need to do. We'll leave that for another conversation. And all the best to Sanjoy. Keep doing what you do so well and hold us all proud in the world. Thank you very much. And over to the President.
And you too, Nandita, thank you so much. Always a pleasure and really honored that you agreed to do this conversation.
Now we'll sort that later.
Well, Sanjay, there is a question from the members. So I'll just ask you one question. With instant gratification of social media, is book reading a dying pastime?
Not at all. I think, social media has a a role in the scheme of things. What it's done actually is made literature much more accessible. So if somebody is getting a book out, it's instantly it's out there. You know that it's a book. 25,000 people will tell you it's a good book, bad book, must-read book. So in nowhere has it dented. I mean, today literature across the world is way more celebrated than perhaps it was. And I'll give you a physical example of it. 15 years ago, a bestseller of an English book, to be on the bestseller list, you would have to sell 3,000 to 5,000 copies. Today, that same book, to be a bestseller in India, you have to sell 35,000 copies. So it's a huge difference in terms of the way book sales are happening. There's much more incredible writing across, not just in English. In fact, in English, you don't get the richness that you do in a Bengali or a Gujarati or a Marathi or a Tamil or a Malayalam, which is really the writing from the land, of the soil, of their stories that we need translated into other languages and into English, including like Manoranjan Vyapari, which is, I think, one of the most successful stories. We had him in at the Jaipur Literature Festival because I loved his story. And Mahashweta Devi, though he had a falling out with her, had told me about him. And as it happened, we were traveling together to the writers' ball at the end of the festival. And in my vehicle, there was the New York Times and the Washington Post sort of press people there. And I was telling them Manoranjan Das' story. He was in the car with me. And I said, this is his story. And they were absolutely amazed. They went back, they wrote up a half a page with his whatever. And as they say, the rest is history. His books today are being sold and translated across 11 different languages.
Yes, I think we have almost come to the end of our program. So I will invite our Vice President, Sucheta Mayer, to give the vote of thanks.
Good evening and namaste to you, Sanjay ji, and everyone here. I've admired your work for a long time, and it's really wonderful to have you with us today. You really rock, Sanjay ji, with your motivational talk and all the work that you have done. You are a living legend and a huge inspiration as a social entrepreneur, not only to the people of Teamwork Arts, but to us all. A point to make is that reading books, like the question a member had asked you, even I would also think has become a forgotten activity. But according to but the Jaipur Lit Fest has truly put reading back in momentum, and everybody wants to attend it in Calcutta. Your efforts are incredible. Energy to build Bharat through art and culture and helping it grow into a new profitable industry in the coming years is laudable. Now, as the founder of Salaam Baalak, we learn from you it's never enough giving back to people who have nothing. We have been reminded by you of a creative energy in our DNA, for which we are grateful to you for nurturing new talents across all art forms. Now I thank Nandita Palchoudhuri for moderating the talk so beautifully. And over to you, Sumita Di.
Yes, thank you once again. So Sanjay, you are the man behind the JLF, Mahindra Art Theatre Awards, Ishara Puppet Theatre, Kahani Festival, Friends of Music concert events, highlighting the importance of art and artists, a global phenomenon. Now, more than 400 million people derive income from creative pursuits. JLF is making arts a paying proposition and building brand India through it. So looking forward to your pursuits to promote brand India. Thank you once again. Thank you all.